Nice to see everybody and see this nice big group of folks here today. I'm Lori Simmons, the director of the Thacher Gallery, and I have the pleasure of introducing this program to all of you today. First, a little bit about the exhibition. So this is linked with an exhibition in the Thacher Gallery, which is called Stitching Communities and the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And it was curated by the USF's Museum Studies Curatorial Practicum class of 14 graduate student curators. I know we have one of them here today, and if there are more, please raise your hand and wave so we can say thank you. And thank you. They were led by Professor Kate Lushik, who is also here today. In addition to the blocks from the AIDS Memorial Quilt, curators also selected archival objects from the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. And the goal of the class was really to talk about, first introduce the history of the AIDS quilt, and then talk about how it connects with community, healing, and activism. And it's a pleasure to talk about that with students. It's been wonderful. Stitching Communities presents 5 of over 6,000 plus blocks. So the quilt is made up of the blocks that you see in the gallery. So I like to think of the gallery as like just showing like this tiny little corner of this much larger community arts project. So we're showing it here, but maybe it's also showing in New York, this little section, and it's in that way it's kind of still out and you know, teaching people across the country in that way. For those of you who it might be new to, each block that we're showing contains 8 panels. And those were created by loved ones. Each of these panels are personalized with the names and often the dates of those folks' lives, as well as motifs and clothing and personal objects and items like teddy bears and rosaries and different things that really honor and remind us of who that person was. There are currently over 110,000 names represented on the larger quilt itself. Now just a little bit about how it was created. Watch out, Post-it notes are going to start falling. In 1987, a group of folks got together, strangers, as the story goes. You can correct anything I say later.
Very strange.
Gathered in San Francisco's storefront to document the lives they feared history was neglecting. And their goal was to create a memorial for those who had died of AIDS and to thereby help people understand the devastating impact of the disease. It began out of anger and frustration and a deep personal experiences of loss, and it grew to become the largest community art project in the world. Just as the AIDS crisis continues throughout the world, the panels continue to be created today. And we have, we're lucky to have one of the people who was at that first, was it the first meeting? Yeah. Here with us today. So let me introduce our 2 speakers. We have Gert McMullin right here. She is often considered the mother of the quilt. Heartbroken and angry that AIDS was attacking her friends, Gert went to that first meeting about making a memorial quilt. There she was the only woman among 5 other folks who had shown up, gay men. And more importantly, she was the only one who knew how to sew. She made her first quilt for activist Roger Lyon, and she has not stopped sewing since then. She has been with the quilt since the beginning and has handled every single panel and block and helped put them together, and is now the quilt conservator and production manager for the AIDS Memorial Quilt. During the COVID pandemic, she also led an effort to make thousands of masks for nurses and doctors and folks like that. So she's always contributing. So thank you. Thank you for being here today. And our other speaker is Leslie Ewing, who's joined the board of the AIDS Memorial Organization in 2020. She has dedicated much of her life to LGBTQ civil rights in the Bay Area. In 2019, she retired as executive director of the Pacific Center in Berkeley, the oldest LGBTQ plus center in the Bay Area, and the third oldest in the nation. And they offer services for youth, peer groups, counseling, and psychotherapy throughout Alameda County. In the 80s, she co-founded the active affinity group Queer and Present Danger. And in 1987, she joined other activists as they developed the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt into a national expression of both rage and reconciliation, and she helped organize the presentation of those in DC, and also was one of the organizers for the 1993 March on Washington for LGBTQ rights. She also, 3 years ago, came full circle by joining the board again, and is the, let's see what it says. Oh, and she's explaining, yeah, so the National AIDS Memorial Organization is an umbrella for both the Grove and the Quilt. So kind of bringing those together again, and it's so amazing when they are together. Those events are so moving. She is also a lifelong cartoonist. So Leslie strip Midnight Crisis ran in numerous LGBTQ periodicals from 1985 to 2001. And I think that I appreciate just knowing like humor is a part of survival, right?
Yes.
So I want to hear more about that too. So thank you. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Okay, this one isn't working.
Hi, I'm going to just talk first about how I got involved with the quilt. My friends in the early 80s were the first to die. Sorry, I'll start getting a little emotional. The first to die in San Francisco. I was working at Macy's then, and I was really kind of flipping out. I mean, I was trying to find some place where I could help people. I would go to the hospitals at nighttime and all, and go to room. And I was at a party, and somebody told me, they said, because they knew I knew how to sew, they said, I think you should call Cleve Jones. And they gave me his phone number. I kind of knew who Cleve was, but kind of not. And so I called him. This was before the first meeting. I called him in April of '87 and asked him about it. And he goes, how did you find out about this? And I just told him, well, somebody told me I should call you. So he told me the size and what you were supposed to do and how you were supposed to make panels. I should tell you that something she didn't touch on was that the size, there is a reason why they're 3 by 6, 3 foot by 6 foot. That's the size of a human grave. And so there was a reasoning behind that. Anyway, so he told me, and I went off. I had to go on vacation, and within 2 weeks would be the first meeting. And I worked on my 2 panels, one for Roger Lyon and another for David Calgaro. And then I went to the first meeting in early May of '87. That meeting, Cleve didn't even go to because he was afraid it was going to be a failure. So he didn't show up. But I went and I brought my 2 panels, and so
Which is something you've never forgotten.
that day. Well, that day was really hard for me because I'd been working on the panels for so long. I went with my boyfriend, and he came to go pick me up after, and I had left the panels with Mike Smith, who's a co-founder of the quilt. And I just really wanted to go back in and get them. And he kind of stops me. He goes, well, the kids have gone off to college, and I think they'll be okay now, right? And so I did leave them. So Mike that day went to Cleveland. He goes, well, 6 people showed up, or 5 people showed up. And he goes, and one brought 2 panels. And he goes, oh, hell, I guess we're going to have to do this. And so they were the 2, other than Marvin's, those were the 2 first panels that were made. And then you also said the purpose of you had mentioned the purpose of the quilt was about memorializing it's not really accurate. We made the quilt as a tool to fight and we were gonna throw our dead down in front of the government and make them take action, that they weren't doing anything. And that's why we made the quilt. We never had any intent of ever doing anything else with it. When we got back, we were gonna close our doors, but we stole the show in Washington, D.C. that year. The march people, the march is the reason most people went to that D.C. in 1987, but at the end of it, we were the ones that were on the front of pages of the Post and everything else. So when we got home, excuse me, I went down to the Names Project thinking I was going to go pick up my panels. I actually put my address on my panels because I wanted them back. And people were clamoring at the windows, people were phoning us, just saying, we want that quilt here, we want to make one, and so the quilt was really continued on. It had a mind of its own. It really had nothing to do with us. We were following it. And I used to tell Cleve, I felt like I was just holding on and trying to keep up with it, and that's kind of what happened. It was never intent. If anybody told me 35 years later I'd still be doing this, I would have thought they were crazy. We intended to go to DC, bring the quilt there, save the world, and be done with it. And we were very wrong about saving the world. But that's what we intent to do. So that's how I first got involved with the quilt. But I had 2 jobs at that time. I worked at Macy's, I sold cologne, and then I worked at the theater at nighttime. And within 2 months, I quit both of those. I had a good amount of savings at the time. I quit both of those just so I could volunteer at the Names Project, because it was the only place I could go and speak people's names. Everybody was so afraid, and they didn't want to deal with it in the Castro, or your families. And my boyfriend left me. I mean, just nobody wanted to be with me because they said I wasn't any fun anymore. But my friends were dying, 2 a week. I've lost over 250 people that I know of now, and I'm sure it's even higher that I probably just haven't researched into. But I've lost every single friend I've ever had in my life, and it was really rough then. And it was great to have a place where I could talk about it and share it with other people, and they would listen to you, and where people hurt as much as me. And that's what I found comfort in, is the pain of others. It's an odd thing to say, but because they knew what I was going through. I mean, you can imagine, I was 32 at the time that this happened, and I was very popular, and I worked in places, in cosmetics, where gay men, would work in the theater, and it was just wiped out. I'd go to the hospital and to go visit a friend, and then go to the roster before I would leave the hospital to see how many other people I knew that were dying in the hospital, and generally it was 2 or 3 more. So anyway, that's how I got involved. How did you get involved?
Can't beat that.
You need your microphone.
Yeah. Mine's not working, so let me have that one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me? Good. I started in '87, but not from the very, very beginning. My extremely significant other, Rebecca Lapierre, and I had helped form an affinity group called Queer and Present Danger, and we went to the '87 March on Washington to get arrested at the Supreme Court. And we did that, but on the way there, I don't know what airline we were on, but we were flying back to DC, and I went to the bathroom at the back of the plane, and there were all these, not all, but about 6 or 8 of these people having a really good time. And drinking a lot, and carrying on, and throwing things. And one of them was Gert. It was the key volunteers, the key people who were going to put this crazy blanket on the ground. And the thing I remember, and I mentioned this to her earlier, is that and at the time I was doing a lot in wholesale and retail, and was working at Under One Roof on Castro Street, which was a store that raised money for HIV organizations. And there was Gert with the table down with a bunch of blank T-shirts and making T-shirts to sell in DC with a felt tip marker by hand, drinking. you know, and I went back and said, Rebecca, you got to go to the bathroom. You know, it's all happening in the back of the plane. And when we got back to San Francisco, we both decided that this was where we wanted to be, because just like Gert said, there was so much pain going on. You'd walk around the Castro, well, not just in '87, all through the '90s anyway, and you'd see somebody one day, and then a week later you'd find out that they were gone. And it was, the way people were dying too was very, very tough all the way around for the whole community. And so to run into people who could laugh and spit in the eye of a plague, that was a very powerful message to me. And it's where I wanted to be, because one of the things that I learned later on too, with kind of this dual thing that I was doing, was that sometimes, you can knock on the door and someone will let you in to talk and to work things out. And sometimes you have to kick the mother in, and it takes both. It takes everything. It takes people who can sew, it takes people who can give a speech, it takes people who can risk arrest, it takes people who can, have a chit chat with Nancy Pelosi, whatever it is, it takes everything. And so that's how I got involved, and stayed with it, and kind of worked behind the scenes when it came time to bring it back home to San Francisco. And am still involved, although in a very different role. I'm on the board, and I'm a firm believer in governance boards, which means that you stay out of the way of the staff, basically. It's not your job. So that's how I got involved. And I had another question for you, Gert. What was the Castro like in the 80s before HIV? And then how soon after HIV did the switch get flipped?
Yeah, I've always hung out with gay men, so I went to the Castro a lot, and it was a wonderful place to be in the early 80s. I mean, all my friends were there. There were bars, there were discos, the Castro was always full of people. I mean, and when you would walk down the street, you hear, my given name is Cindy. It's not Gert. But the guys hear, oh, Cindy, and you couldn't walk down without knowing everybody. And it was one of the happiest places, and one of the reasons I hung around gay men. A lot of people say, because they're so nice. Well, I did it because they were so mean to me, but they were so much fun. There was always fun going on. It slowly started to change very early to mid 80s. This is before they knew that anything about AIDS. They didn't have a name for it. I can look back actually at '79 and know that I had some friends of mine that were sick. And so it changed pretty quickly. First, I remember, when they found there were just a few men dying and they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what it was. And in about 82, 83, it started to get really, really scary. I mean, people were blaming each other. They were blaming the bars. They were blaming this or that. And it's just hard to kind of explain that kind of transition. It went from very light and happy to just dark and scary, and nobody, you didn't want to look people in the eye sometimes. I walked down the street and I'd see people that were really thin. They, like skeleton-like, or have lesions all over them. And it was such a visual disease too. It wasn't something that, like COVID, people got sick and they went to the hospital. You didn't see them again. This was in your face, an ugly way to die. And so then we started, making up groups, but the only help that came was from ourselves, was trying to find something to help these people die, not to help them live. We were just helping them get through and die. So it was a really hard place to be down there. I mean, the streets then were more deserted, not deserted, but they were less and less people. It wasn't the happy-go-lucky. I think the only change I ever saw was after we went on the tour. The first tour we went on in 1988, and we came back, and I noticed a different vibe, kind of, that maybe there was a little bit of hope that something would happen. But that was that was in the really deep parts of AIDS. I mean, from the 86 to 96 was a horrific time in San Francisco. I try not to go back there in my mind too much because it's so difficult to watch all your friends die, you know, really miserable deaths, and know that there's nothing you can do and nobody else is doing anything. And I think that was the most maddening part, was that nobody else was doing anything. One thing I did love about what kept me at the quilt was because Cleve was all about action, and not, even though he is a speaker, he wasn't about talking, he was about action. And he got me, you know, involved in demonstrations and throwing it in people's faces, and we were angry, and I just, you know, wanted someone to reach out like they cared. To this day, I know in '87, a lot of people look at it, oh, it was a big success. We look at it as a big failure, Cleve and myself and others, is that we did not do what we wanted to get done. We did bring the quilt there, yeah, we did steal the show, but we didn't get anything changed, and that was really hard for us, you know, to this day. I got to talk about COVID a little bit. When COVID came out, and I think it was 2 months, we had a vaccine, a good vaccine that didn't kill anybody. I mean, never has the government done. Had they done anything, you know, I wouldn't have had to watch and help my friends die like that. I mean, it's really lonely. I can't imagine what they must feel, a person who's dying, that there's nobody going to come and help me. Who's going to come save me? You know, we just came to help them die. Anyway, so.
So glad I asked.
I know, it's a miserable, but I gotta say too, when she was talking about the laughter and stuff, the quilt, the beauty of the quilt is it's every single emotion you can think of. There's a lot of happiness in there, and I look at the quilt as it's a happy thing. It can be the saddest thing I want it to be, but it could also be, you know, we let you put anything you want on any of your panels. We don't judge anything. It can have profanity, it can have nudity, because we're not here to judge, and that's the beauty of the quilt, is that it's whatever you want it to be. And some people come in, we had somebody down at Golden Gate Park, they had a picnic around their panel. We've had people come in and sing happy birthday around their panels. And then we have some people come in and just, you're miserable around their panels. And it's that the beauty of it is you're safe there. It's a safe place to do that. We're not gonna judge you. You know, the laughter that went on in those early years, and it was, some of the things we said were just unforgivably cruel. It's just because that's what comes out of death sometimes. There's that kind of humor to get through it. But it was a really special, and still is a really special place to work at. I wouldn't be there for 35 years if it wasn't. You know, I used to make a lot more money than what I actually volunteered for the quilt for about a half a year before they actually first gave me a paycheck, only because I had gone through also all of my money for the quilt. It's just that type of place that you want to give to it, and it saved me in so many ways, and gave me a place to place my anger, and a few other places too. So.
When she talks about the Castro and what it was like, one of the things I remember about the workshop, and the workshop, it was on Market Street, where Catch Restaurant is today. And one of the things, just it kind of was like that plane ride, you know, on Castro Street, or on Market rather. And Gert created, in many respects, the AIDS disco. There were disco balls all over the place. It was open practically 24 hours a day.
Yes, it was.
It was open 24 hours a day. Music was blaring the whole time. People were dancing as much as they could or whatever. And it was a place that if you were sewing a panel, you know, sometimes that families would come in and they'd have little pieces and they'd bring it, put it together and that kind of thing. But it was a place that was a safe space. And this was a time when there was no LGBT community center at all in San Francisco. And so this workshop became, and it was maybe 2,000, 3,000 square feet maybe. And it was the de facto community center where people would put stuff on the windows if there was an announcement or that type of thing. And it served a purpose beyond what we realized at the time. And my most poignant, well, I ended up doing data entry, which meant with each panel, someone would write a letter about their loved one and why they made the panel and, all of it. And so my girlfriend almost left me at one point over this. But our deal was that after work, we would come in and go through the letters and enter the data entry into our FileMaker database. Then we would write a letter thanking the person who made the panel. And we could do that for about 45 minutes on average, and then we'd have to take a break. We'd go out on the street and have a smoke or whatever, and then come back in, and we'd stay till maybe midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning doing this, and then go home. And I suddenly realized that there were some men who were making work. They'd come in and they'd work on one panel, and they were sick. And I suddenly realized they were making their own panels because nobody else would do it for them. They had no family or friends left. And so at that point I thought, well, we're in it to win it. We're going to stay with this. So that was what it was like in the Castro then. And at the time, I live in Berkeley, and I know a lot of feminist separatists, and I got a lot of in my face kind of reaction from them. Why are you serving men? Why are you helping men? You have skills. Why aren't you doing this for women and raising women and holding women up? I was just trying to help stop an epidemic. I never thought about gender. We were putting out a fire with, that was the tool we had, a little glass of water for a fire. So, I think it's important to remember those things and how it was. And I don't mean to be a downer, but because I said we had a hell of a good time too. It was that juxtaposition that kept us going. It was sort of like, we used to call it mortician's humor. Really dark, really dark. Talk a little bit about how the quilt was returned to this Bay Area. Just a little.
Okay. Yeah, the quilt in 1999 moved from San Francisco. That's when they were doing the ballpark thing there, and the .com thing was going crazy, and our rent was going, I think, from $70, 70 cents a square foot to $70 a square foot. So we had to get out of San Francisco, and so we moved to Atlanta. And we were there for 18 years. It was really hell. Because I was born here, and California's a lot different than Georgia, boy. A lot different. Yeah, people used to say, Gert, you can't do anything you want to do. And I said, why not? But anyway, so it stayed there for quite some time. And finally, about 2018, I got a call from Cleve for the 5th time saying he thought he was going to get it back home. And this time he did. We were basically going under. There were many years. The quilt is a sorry excuse for a fundraiser. We've never been really good at it. A lot of that, is because we don't give a direct service to people that are dying of AIDS. We give a direct service to the people who are left behind. And that's what we do. We teach in compassion. But so we you know, now I don't remember why I brought this up. So we really need to move. But we were going under in Atlanta. We just were so much in debt and all. And thank God for Gilead. That's all. But Nancy Pelosi heard about that the quilt was having trouble, and that might go to a museum there because we couldn't afford to stay in our warehouse any longer. And Nancy Pelosi got Gilead, I believe got Gilead, but either way, that both of them together got it back home where it belonged. Gilead has been so wonderful to us and has given us new shelving and just everything, and they just told us money wasn't an object, they were going to get it back here, and they did. And luckily, I was lucky enough to come with it. I wasn't quite sure at the beginning. I just said, you know, they didn't know if they could get me back here, and I was okay with that. It wasn't going to be perfect, but I just wanted the quilt to come home. I always knew it would come home. Many people said, oh no, it's going to go to DC or it'll go so, but I knew it would come back to San Francisco. So that's how it got there. And now that it is back, we're working with the National AIDS Grove, and it's almost like the perfect marriage, I think, you know, together. So, you know. I did want to talk about real quickly how many panels were in the 1987 display, just to kind of go back a little bit and just show you the growth of what happened during those years. In the first year, we brought in 1,920 panels, and like I said, we thought that was a failure because many more people had died than that. But we brought that, and it took about a block of, right in front of the mall, or right in front of the Smithsonian on the mall, it took about a block of it. The next year, we had 8,288. That's how, at the growth of it. And, you know, and so that was all sewn up in that Market Street workshop. The next time we went, it was 22,000 panels. But the biggest jump was in 1996 when we went up to 40,000 panels that we brought, more than 40,000 we brought. That weekend, we checked in 4,000 panels in 2 days. That's how much death was going on. And now the quilt is large, but it's only 14% of the United States deaths. I mean, the quilt back at San Leandro that weighs 60 tons and it's only 14%. I mean, you know, just give you an idea. I mean, I don't have a percentage on what the world, you know, I've always looked at the quilt like it's just a little thing because that's what it is. It's just a drop in the bucket to what everybody thinks. Well, everybody has one. No, I don't make any of those panels unless I know the person. It has to come from somebody. So they're all made from individuals who send them from all over the world to us to have them be with whatever the mothership of that. So, but it's a very small percentage of what it could be and how big it could be.
So I didn't see a clock in this room. How are we doing on time? So we should probably open up to answer.
Use a little bit more time if you.
Okay, just a little quickie. The quilt is still very active today. It's not just sitting in a warehouse. There are displays like we have here today, and currently it's on tour in the South. It's in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Where else?
Oh, Louisiana, Tennessee.
Tennessee, and then ending up in
All
Houston.
South, yes.
And that's the first tour really that we've been able to launch because of COVID, and now we're getting back into it. And the combination of the Grove, which is in Golden Gate Park, which if you've never been, it's a very good place to go. Let's put it that way. And the quilt it is a good marriage, and really has created a real national AIDS memorial. And the quilt is going out, and the Grove is here, and people come to it. That's the only way I can kind of say it. But one helps the other to raise awareness around HIV and the fact that HIV has not gone away. And especially among communities of color, non-white people are still very much threatened and affected by HIV. And what's interesting as we watch these things roll out, I've watched the organization shift slightly, that we are not necessarily just an HIV organization. We are an organization that is promoting or working for health care to be recognized as a civil right, that it's a social justice issue. And that's a shift, where we are one limb on a very big tree. And we have things to learn, and we have things to teach. And we work with a much broader coalition of organizations and activists working for on other limbs of the tree of healthcare being a social justice issue. And that's another big step of hope, I think, overall.
Right now, actually, I'm working with a group for the women that have been persecuted and executed in Iran. So they're making very small, they're 12 by 12 panels, not with names on it, but just some kind of statement. And I've been helping them put them together. And so we like to reach out and try to help, anybody with, especially, any kind of social right, those kind of things, social justice causes. So, but the quilt, we still bring in panels every day. When she's right about COVID, when we came here, COVID hit directly after we just got everything on the shelf, and it really stopped us in our tracks, because what do? We attract crowds. And so we stopped absolutely everything. I was the only person that was allowed down in those offices or by the quilt. And it was kind of me and my dog, and it was a lonely time. That's when I started doing the other, the mass. But we still bring in panels. We usually bring in on average about one a day. It kind of goes, it's always gone with the rate of death, that's how many panels we'll get in, and it has decreased a lot. But we have hundreds of displays out at any given time. A display can be one of those blocks that you see out there, or several of them, or hundreds of them. World AIDS Day is our very busiest time. That's December 1st. We send out maybe about a fifth of the whole quilt out all over the country and the world then. And we still have people that come in. I hold 2 quilt repair and panel making workshops, one in San Francisco and one in San Leandro every month. And we still get people that come to that. And it's not as busy as it was, but frankly, we don't want to be in business forever. We want to be out of business. We want, there's a panel that came in 1987 that hangs up right by my sewing area that I've kept up since that year. It came in and it said "the last one" in big black and white letters. And we were so taken by it, we asked the guy if we could hold on to it and sew it in after it was over. So I've been, for 35 years, that's been my goal. I was hoping to sew it in with some other people that are now gone, but I hope that before I go, that that's one of my to-do lists. I'd like to be able to know I sewed that in finally. But it sits there as a reminder to all of us what we're after. We're not here to be in business. We want to be out of business. So. Who'd have thought it took so long? Anyway,
So I think maybe I'll just answer one question that was on the list, and then we'll open it up for other questions. And people ask me, how can I get involved? And what can I do? And certainly making a panel for a family member or a friend or someone that you knew is always a good way to get involved. But we have displays at Golden Gate Park at the AIDS Memorial Grove, and we call ourselves dinosaurs. It's a very physical thing. In the 90s, I was on the mall in DC loading a truck at 3 a.m. in the morning. I don't do that anymore. I'm too old to do that. And a lot of what goes on with one of those displays is very physical work, that being younger and stronger is a very good thing. And I would encourage anybody who is in San Francisco the first week of June to consider volunteering at Golden Gate Park to help us put down walkway, to help us bring the quilt out and put it down, to help us set up information booths, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff. When we took it the second time in '88 to DC, there were 8,000 panels, and it took 2,500 volunteers for the weekend to handle it. That's how labor intensive this is.
96 took 15,000.
Yeah, in '96 it had jumped to 15,000 volunteers. I mean, the size of it and the growth and the physical stuff of it is very daunting. So anyway, if that would be my suggestion. If anybody would like to have some hands-on experience about what really happens.
I want to add something to this. I just have to add something to that because I do have a volunteer request. Actually, since she brought it up, we're going to be inventorying the quilt, which is also a very physical thing. I've not been able to do it since we got here with COVID, and it's just been really difficult. And we just go through and, they check it off. But we do need people, so if anybody wants to, now that's down in San Leandro, but if anybody wants to, you can come down and work with us. I mean, it's actually one of the more favorite jobs of volunteers because you actually get to physically handle the quilt. And you get to listen to a lot of my stories that will be, I remember that one.
Again.
I remember this one. But, and probably some disco music. We still have disco balls all through there. Anyway, okay.
Okay, questions?
No. Have any of you guys had any? Oh, good. Go ahead.
I know there's probably not like a real answer for this, but why do you think the quilt catched on so much and became such an important symbol?
I didn't hear this.
Why did it catch on so well?
Why did it catch on so well? There was no, when you have people dying and nobody wants to talk about it. Your family doesn't want to. Everybody wanted to just hush hush. And there was no place where you could feel comfortable enough to tell the story of how horrible of a death or whatever happened, or that your gay son, got this, what they considered a gay disease then, so it was a safe place. But the reason it really caught on was that '88 tour that we went on. We went across the country, and people were hungry to be with something like that. I mean, we'd come into the city, there'd be 500 volunteers in Timbuktu somewhere because they weren't allowed to talk about it, but here they could. And so I think it caught on that way. And then parents, but it like, when you ask that, like I said, I still look at it like a failure in some ways. I know other people don't, but because there could be so many more.
It also was the visual representation of a plague. And so when something went on, something like a March on Washington event or something like that where the quilt was there, or the quilt displays in DC, and if there was press coverage,
oh yeah,
we were always above the
front
fold.
page.
It was very visual, and there was always any article about HIV that you saw in the paper in the 80s, 90s, and well into the 2000s, even, no. Mine. Any article about HIV would have a picture of the quilt.
Yeah.
All right, now.
No, I don't want it.
All right. We've known each other a long time. Anything else?
You touched a little bit on how the demographics of HIV are different based on geography and also the time, sort of the timeline of the epidemic. And so, especially since it is something that is global, you've touched a little bit on receiving panels and also sending them out all around the world. How has the quilt been received in other countries where HIV maybe looks very different than it does in the US?
World AIDS Day actually started because of the quilt. Dr. Jonathan Mann started it, and they brought us to all different countries. I've been to Italy, we've been to Spain, we've been all over the place, and it has been received very well. Australia has one of the biggest quilts that is not, we don't own that I think they have about 200 of those blocks. They made their own. I went to Switzerland. We went there in the hopes that we could show them what size it would be, so their panels could stay in their own country, because our options of going to different countries were pretty nil after World AIDS Day, because the World Health Organization, they paid for us to go there. But it has been very well received. In 1992, we went to DC and we had an area that was open for different countries to bring their panels in, and that area filled up pretty well. It's not to any size like it is for us, America, but truly most of the people want their panels to come here. Puerto Rico had a pretty, Spain had a pretty big quilt, and they ended up eventually sending it to us, and now we have it. I think that they just want it to be there, but we've been all over the world many times. So,
Did that answer your question?
I think I'm also thinking about, sort of in other countries, say specifically in the global south, where again the timeline and the access to medication and everything else has just been very different. So how has the quilt been as received in communities where HIV is maybe less associated as historically a disease, something that affected LGBT people?
I don't have an answer for that.
We don't really know, because the projects that have gone on in other countries have been theirs, and they're singular. One thing I do want to mention is that HIV struck the gay community here in the United States first. And that doesn't mean that that's the only place that it was active. And we talk about the Castro and white gay men being affected early on, but that also is only sort of true. And certainly in cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, the not only was it mostly white gay men that we heard about or that were coming in, but it was also, you had a demographic that was perhaps well positioned in media, the arts, marketing, financial world, that type of thing. So the people were in place who knew how to get attention and how to bring attention. And in many respects, what really spurned a lot of the anger, beyond the fact that you were sick and nobody cared about you, which would do it, was the fact that the people who were getting sick knew how to make a phone call to get somebody to, at the New York Times to put that photo above the fold, type of thing. I'm speaking very generally, but I think you know what I'm saying. And that has been one of the biggest challenges. It's a challenge that runs across LGBT community organizing and trying to be respectful of all people and how they interpret what they need, and not tell people what they need to do to make their lives better. And I'm talking around it, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely, thank you.
Anything else? Yes.
I was just wondering if, just following on that same question, if you could talk a little bit about the Call My Name project. Are you involved in that piece of it? And that at least speaks to a little bit about Black communities in American South. I don't know any.
Yeah, I'm not personally involved in it. I'm personally involved with reading budget sheets
When we moved to Atlanta in 2013, we started that project because we were in the South and we needed to reach out to that community. We had been a little bit throughout the years, but nothing like what we did there. So we ended up meeting a group of women, a lot of different women from different churches. Jada and I used to go down from church to church, and we would do so, and we'd drag all this fabric and all down and try to get them to make panels. It's hard no matter who you are, to make a panel. It's not an easy thing to get somebody to walk through those doors, but we finally did. And so then we got a program that we called Call My Name, and we started going out more heavily into those communities. Instead of making people come into us, we went out to them. And so then when we got back to San Francisco, we picked up on that again. It took a few years, we couldn't really get it going again, but that's what we have right now in the South. It's Change the Pattern is what it's called, and it's a tour that we've had for about the last 4 months, and we go through November, and it's going into those communities, into those churches, and getting people to make panels or just to sit and talk about what they went through in their lives, and that's been a taboo thing for in their community. So that's what we're doing right now, and we've been highly successful so far. I know they just got done with Baton Rouge, and they're still going there. So does that answer your question? Okay, yeah.
A lot of this kind of information can be found on the website. You have to dig around. It's one of those, it keeps going forever and ever. But if you go to the website, you'll find out about the Pedro Zamora Scholarship Fund that we've generated for young activists who are interested in working towards, social justice. It doesn't actually have to be with HIV, but are realizing that healthcare is a social justice issue. And this year we gave out 19 scholarships of $5,000 to $10,000 each. And yeah, so that was a good deal. And the recipients were students, college students, who were from all over the country. And this year, I was on the group that was reading the applications, and it gave me hope. But I think there were 320 applicants, something like that. Yeah, and that was a big jump up. So that's encouraging.
And I think about 90% of that was African Americans that had received the award too.
You didn't hear what she said.
Anyway,
most were African American.
Yeah, about 90% of it went to African Americans.
So that to me says that the work on this tour around in the South and really focusing on underserved populations is paying some dividends with younger people wanting to get involved.
I think one of the student curators received one of those and has been working at Ash Brown.
Yes.
So from our museum studies program.
Yes, and when I talked to John earlier, he said if Ash was here, to be sure to. And Ash has did a lot of the groundwork for the tour that's going on now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go.
I think this idea of stitching communities back together is important as well now, after we've had this, we've known a plague, but now we've also known the epidemic that we've had. And I'm wondering if you have any wisdom or any advice for people in the room for the years to come, and after having lived through this very different epidemic. If you have any kind of, because you've done it twice, technically, if you have any wisdom or advice for us.
Well, there's little wisdom. Wear your mask. No, I don't have anything. Do you have anything?
My advice, don't let anybody tell you one person can't make a difference when, I watched it happen, and it always starts with one person. There was not a lot of people with the AIDS epidemic when it went on. There were 5 of us that showed up at a women's building thing, and it turned into this. So don't let anybody stop you. Stand up when you see somebody being just having bad things happen to them, not being treated properly, not getting rights. You can make a difference, and it can be just one person. So that's the advice I have.
Yes.
I also just want to tell you guys, I want to invite you to, really, I think that coming down San Leandro to the warehouse would, everybody, once they get out of it, oh, I'm so glad I came. We give tours, you don't have to inventory if you don't want to. But, there's a lot of magic that goes on in that 7,000 square foot building.
And it's not impossible to get to it.
Yeah.
It's right at the entrance to the Oakland Airport on Doolittle. And to get there, you can take BART and get off at the Coliseum station. And if you let someone know beforehand that you're going to be there, probably someone will come to the station and pick you up.
Yeah, we've been known to do it. Yeah.
Along those lines, I'm just really curious to hear, I'd love to know like where you learned to sew and like also like what's your day like? Are you piecing things together? Are you fixing like, yeah.
My mom died when I was 9. She used to sew a lot. When she died, we had a big family. We got kind of poor, and I didn't like being poor, so I took her sewing machine and I taught myself how to sew, how to make clothes, and I would make clothes for myself. I wanted a different outfit every day, blah, blah, blah. And then I used it I sewed during my high school. I used to bribe my teachers for better grades with things and stuff like that. So, and I've always sewn presents for my friends. I don't go buy presents. I like to sew. It's very therapeutic. You have a hard day, and you can make something. It's instant gratification. I've got 6 different curtains in my house I can put up at any given time, and I do upholstery and other stuff. So that's where I learned how to sew. I've not been trained professionally by any means. It was just all, I would take apart your jacket and figure out how to do it, and I just kind of taught myself. And so I'm one of the few people actually that have known how to sew, that have walked to the doors of the Names Project. But I actually prefer people who don't know how to sew, because they're somebody who really knows how to sew really well. They never make it, because what's this air conditioning invent doing on this? It breaks every rule of sewing that you'll ever can imagine is in sewing, and so most people, they don't. I need a blank mind, then I can show them how to do what we want them to do, because you got to kind of take your ego out of it, because it's not perfect. They're not sewn perfect, and you have to. If it's sewn funky ass, I sew it funky ass. So we have a rule that when we repair them or work on them, it should never look like we had been there. And so we sew the way they did. There are many, she had mentioned out, they were spray painted in the beginning.
I was going to say, I've made 2.
Huh?
I've made 2, and they're not sewn.
Yeah.
They're felt tip markers and spray paint.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have to know how to sew to make a panel. They can be painted, glued, there's or just sewn like, yes, like I said, there's some there's so much anger in them that you want to make sure. There was one that was sent in that kind of was at an angle like this, and it had threads all hanging off of it, and gee, what should I do with this one? So I didn't want to lose all that anger that was in it, so I just got a big piece of clear plastic, and I put it on sewed it on that so that people could see the way that it came in. Yeah, I could have made it beautiful. I could have sewn it really, they could all be beautiful. They are all beautiful, but in a different way. There's some that are just, you can feel the love, some you can feel the anger and all that, and so we have to take our ego aside, stick it aside, and do what's best for the quilt, which is a hard thing to do. But my day is like pretty much that. I do, I have the best job at the Names Project. I get to decide how they go in those blocks. We'll collect, and years ago there'd be thousands of them we would collect, and I'd put them in piles of horizontal and vertical or different colors and stuff, and then we have an area out and that we just lay them down and just kind of keep changing them out until we think that it looks good. There's many reasons why we put them together. Some are panel maker request, some are we used to do it by region of the country when we had thousands coming in every year, so that way when it went out to Wisconsin, we could try to get as many Wisconsin panels out there. Now we don't do that so much, but I do You might notice when you look at them that I put all the big stuff on the top, so if there's like little writing or photographs or little things, or maybe something in pockets, people put things in letters and all kinds of, we put those down on the bottom. If they're beautiful on the back side, we put them on the bottom, and then the other ones that are bigger on the top. We try to do that in order so that when they're hanging, you can at least see them. So
Easier
there's
to
some
read.
thought put into it. We actually got to be able to patent the quilt because of they came once and watched the way that we bundled, and they thought we just kind of slapped them together, and they realized that we did it in an artful way. But it's absolutely the best job at the Names Project. I'm really selfish about it, and that's why I haven't moved to any other area. I've always done sewing, because I get to touch them all and look at all of them. And some of them, like she mentioned, you have the letters, and there's sometimes the letters are on them, but some of them are more beautiful on the backs than they are on the fronts. I mean, there's so many. We have air conditioning vents. We've never told anybody they couldn't put something on, except for I had to take a hypodermic needle off and a light bulb. But we allow you to put, there's ashes, anything you could really imagine. There's some we call the unfoldables that have pony sticks on them, and and so we have this whole section where you can only fold them so far because they're just so big. I made one with a kitty cat, it was a bad taste, a dead flat cat, and it's got this tail that sticks up. So it's all, so when you fold it up, it doesn't fold up really properly. So but my day is fixing those, and going through. I do also do all the entry into the DAC for all the stuff that's from the panels, all the information that comes with it. I put that, what she was talking about, what she used to do, I do now. I do all that, and a host of many other things, but primarily the conservation. I've got normally have anywhere from 150 to 200 that just need something done to them, some more major than others, but after 35 years, the quilt's kind of like, your favorite pajamas you won't throw away and they don't fold very well in the drawers anymore. Well, that's what the quilt's like, the first ones too. And so we have to be more careful with, and I'm going to start a thing very soon where we're going to slowly go through the whole quilt, open them up. I've got a group of volunteers, and we could always use more. And this is actually one of the better jobs because you get to actually see all the panels. We're going to open them up and look for repairs, but also look for wear and tear and things. We would never say one couldn't go on display, but maybe it has to be limited, things like that. And we're going to just slowly go through the entire thing so that we know what we're dealing with more. Because the only way I get repairs generally or by when it goes out and display somewhere, or when they send it. Like you said, you showed me something that needed to be repaired. They come back with a note on them, and that's generally, because we have 6,000 of these, I can't go, know whatever. So I'm sure there's a lot of things that need to be done to different ones, but generally the public tells us what, that's what my day's like. So.
In the back?
I know you said that you guys don't do a quilt specifically for a region in the country, but are there quilts being made like right now for, I guess, a non-Western audience that we could probably do for?
I didn't hear the last part. Are there quilts being made for where?
For a non-Western audience, like maybe not in the West.
You mean like you mean?
Maybe not like America or Europe.
Well, they are being made, but they're being made there, not here for there. So there isn't, a local volunteer effort, focusing on other countries right now. And some of these quilt.
There is a global quilt.
There is a global quilt, yeah.
There's a global quilt that actually comes out of New York by Jeff Basaki, he has. And so he's probably got about 50 that he brought to the gay games I went to when it was in Paris. And they have about 50 12 by 12. So, but it still comes out of New York. But they send them there and back and forth from there to go to international things because Jeff goes more into it.
But most of these quilt projects that are not in the States have been autonomous, serving their own population and doing it their way. You were talking about the other countries. I remember Japan was doing their own quilt
they came in
project, and it looked very different and
they were smaller.
Small, it was appropriate to what they were used to doing as far as fabric art, and it all boils down to fabric art.
Had we started ours as a memorial like they did, ours probably would have looked different. But we started it as an activist thing. The 3 foot by 6 foot, we were laying down, right in front of the White House, we were laying our dead down. And this is how much space it would take. So that's why, You know, in retrospect, yeah, if we had thought about it as a memorial, we probably would have done smaller,
Yeah,
but there's
we-
a statement with
After a
that.
while, we kept saying, why didn't we say 3 inches by 6 inches?
Though they did, we did receive though, remember? We received about
Everybody get a magnifying glass.
a half a dozen like that, and I found them under Cleve's desk. They were 3 inch by 6 inch, and I just kind of, that's what you guys get. So I grabbed them and we called it the Little People panel, and put all of them on one panel. And that's what we call it. I don't even know, I can't remember the actual names that were on, but we use them all. We have a lot of different panels that have been left. I actually have a really good story that in 1987, we were going to go to Moscone, and there was a guy that came in and was making this really beautiful panel. This is a quilt magic story. He was making this really beautiful panel for TED, and within the TED, it kind of had the silhouette, and it was just painted, a silhouette of somebody's face. And this guy who was making it was really, really sick. I mean, really sick. Just skin and bones. And all of a sudden, he just stopped showing up. And I said, oh, God, we kept waiting. You know, he died. And we figured he died. And so Scott Lago and I decided, let's finish it for him. He wanted to, you know, so we did what we could to finish it. We got pictures of us holding it up. We finished it. And we put it into a 12 by 12, and it went to the Moscone display. And I was walking around Moscone that day, and I came across a guy kneeling down crying over it, and I was trying to cheer him up, and so oh God, I love that panel, and I started to tell the story, and he turned up and looked at me, and it was him. And I just, and he was crying, and he just said, he goes, I knew it couldn't be here, it was not gonna be here. And you know, he goes, how did you, you know, and he was so thrilled that it was here. I never saw him again, and I'm sure he looked horrible, and I'm sure he died, but it was a really beautiful moment, you know, that we had helped somebody. And my feeling, if we helped one person like that, this whole thing was worth it. You know, we got him through, you know, he got to make sure that his lover's name was there, you know, and this happened, and when I went on the tour, and this would happen daily, just these heart-wrenching things, but you knew that I got to be a part of, you know, when I went on the first tour, I thanked Cleve, and I worked my butt off, I mean, on that tour, and I thanked him, you know, and he goes, why are you thanking me for that? The opportunity to help somebody like Cleve had helped me, you know, not to get over it because you don't, but to get through it and to be around people who would let you get through it, so.
One last question?
Sure.
I'm curious where like the first original 1,000 panels maybe are, and if they're kind of kept together, like the panels from like the early 80s.
They're there.
I didn't hear this.
The original panels. Where are the original panels?
They're in the San Leandro office
Yeah,
in the
we haven't
warehouse.
lost them.
We would never, the only panel that, it's a copy of it, one of the panels that I made for Roger Lyon, it's is owned by the Smithsonian, but it's a copy of it. The quilt, our intent is never to have them somewhere else. They'll always be together, and they'll always go on display, maybe minimally. You know, like Marvin, we looked at, when we were at Golden Gate Park, the older ones, they're so faded because we used them in the sun, and, you know, it's had 35 years of being out in the sun every year, and it takes its toll on, you know. But they're all there, so if you came down to visit, we could pull one out, and if you do come to visit, just tell us, you know, if there's one in particular you want to see, because we do pull them out and let people sit with them and take pictures or whatever if they want to see. A lot of people come in, oh, my uncle, I never met him, you know, but I want to see his panel, and so we get a lot of that.
You can also see a panel on the website.
But it's not the same.
It's not the same. But if you're curious about a relative or something like that, and you just want to see if a panel was made for them, that's one way to check that out too.
Something we do too when they're out on display, we tend to, a lot of people leave flowers, they leave all kinds of things all over the quilt. People have left wedding rings, teddy bears, all kinds of stuff. So we go, before we pick up the quilt, and we did it in Golden Gate Park, we go and scan it and then tag these things. I learned this at the memorial in DC. Behind those, where the wall of names is, they have these drawers, and they pick up things that people leave all the time, and they stick them in the drawers. So we did that, and we pick up things and stick it in the files, which all those files, there were 20 file cabinets full of 4-drawer file cabinets full of about 200 and some odd documents that all went to the Library of Congress. when we first moved here, and they're digitizing all of that, so it'll be available to students like you and other people that they can read the stories behind. It may be about the person who was memorialized, but a lot of times it's just about what they went through, the person who made the piano. We've got.
It's been a privilege for us to join you today. We really appreciate it, and thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.